This is episode 52 of the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast, and today I welcome back April Rain to the conversation to continue talking about the intersection between race, gender, and life in America. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the classroom that is Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where every episode I welcome a smart expert to talk about the issues that matter to you, your family, your community, your planet, as well as your own mental and physical health, and much, much more. Now, please take a moment at some point now or after you're done listening to write a rating for this podcast, as well as give the 5 stars if you think I deserve it. And I can't put this podcast out 3 times a week without your support. As of now, we have several thousand listeners per episode. I'm still ad-free, but I'd love to welcome you to the community we built on Patreon, where over 350 people are now paying subscribers, and I've got some exciting news for that community of patrons. So go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick to join us as we work with each other there to find sanity and peace in what seems like a very chaotic world. All right, today I welcome April Rain back to the conversation because I started a conversation with her back in episode 24, and I just consider it to be a continuing discussion and relationship that I build with her, where we've built a kind of trust and appreciation, respect for each other in terms of she will take my ignorant questions about race and gender and sexuality and not beat me over the head with them as I try to learn to be less ignorant, less apathetic, more understanding, and more enlightened about the issues that I think really matter and affect us all and connect us all when it comes to race and gender and intersectionality. And, you know, frankly, I don't get out that much anymore. And even when I did, I wasn't really working with and surrounded with as much ethnic diversity, religious diversity, gender, and sexual orientation diversity as I was in the prime of my 20s, living in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where I came across, you name it, in New York City, Manhattan, of course, traveling across the country as well. Now I mostly sit in my house and record conversations with really smart people and hang out with my family. And I talk with lots of you on the phone and others as well, but for the podcast, I want to continue to try to have conversations with people that are different from me, that are ethnically different from me, that aren't just white straight guys. That's what I am. That's what a lot of you are. But I want to talk with black women, of course, as I just said. I want to talk with gay people and Jewish people and Muslim men and women and people from different backgrounds and walks of life, because you don't necessarily have access to them, and you want to hear what they have to say. You might not live in an ethnically diverse area. I know that many of you don't. You live all over the country listening to this podcast, all over the world. There's a lot of international listeners now, which is really cool. Hello to everybody in Australia. Bottom line is, many of my guests are going to be from different backgrounds than me and then you, and I hope that you appreciate that. If you've got ideas for people you want me to reach out to and interview, as always, please send them my way. Okay, let's get to my guest today, April Rain. You've got to follow her on Twitter, where she is excellent. She has a great following on Twitter. She was a corporate lawyer, often one of the only black women in the room. On Twitter, by the way, at Reign of April. But she left the world of corporate law and walked away from her legal practice and found her true passion. And now she's also the creator of a viral hashtag turn movement, hashtag Oscars So White, which is all about the lack of representation of marginalized communities in Hollywood and beyond since about 2015. She is an influential and sought after media presence and speaker and prolific on social media. I love talking to her. We've established a trusting, thoughtful relationship. She's really great. And I think you're going to love this conversation with April Rain. Please follow her on Twitter and check out all of her stuff at Reign of April, REIGN of April. Tell you heard her here. Always encourages people to come back on her second appearance. Check out her appearance in episode 24 as well, if you like this one. Hi, April Rain.
Hi, Pete Dominick.
Thank you very much for talking to me earlier today off the air, and thank you very much for letting me press record on a conversation with you.
It is always a pleasure to talk with you.
So I've been reading your Twitter feed, as I always do, watching you tweet about the debates the other night, about politics, and always like to talk to you about basically anything. Earlier we talked about comedy, but politics, gender, race, all of it. And I'm confused about what my role should be, and I'm confused about some issues, and wanted to start with this question, or this what I wrote on Twitter earlier, which was, as a white person, I try to do my best to be anti-racist and anti-sexist, but I'm finding it difficult and confusing to watch black progressives fight over anything from Gayle King's comments to Bernie or anything political. My instinct is I should mostly be listening, but my nature is to ask questions. April, I know that like people aren't, just because you're part of an ethnicity, you're supposed to agree or disagree on things, but I'm trying to understand and not talk too much, and I've already talked too much on this conversation. What am I supposed to do?
I think trust your instincts, which are to listen and learn the same way I would if I saw two people from the LGBT plus community having a conversation,
Sure.
About an issue that I was interested in, but I really wanted their viewpoints. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking a well-placed question. Sometimes it's helpful to preface it and to really be thoughtful about the tone of your question,
yes.
right? Because we all want to ensure that we're not coming in like, teach me more, or, I definitely feel that, team A is saying better things than team B. And so let me, figure out, impress me or persuade me. We don't want any of that. And so, I think that your instincts of listening and following along with the people that you generally agree with on other issues is a good way to go, and what we all should be doing.
So when it comes to, let's just talk briefly about what this whole dust up and real controversy, a serious controversy over the aftermath of Kobe Bryant's death, and people bringing up the allegations of him. Obviously, he was accused of credible accusations, I guess, of rape years and years ago. And Gayle King asked a basketball player named Lisa Leslie, who was good friends with Kobe Bryant, about those allegations. And then all hell seemed to break loose. And Snoop Dogg made comments, including a threat to Gayle King. Gayle King responded. Oprah responded. Snoop apologized. And I'm just laying this out. And if I've got anything wrong here, let me know, so people that don't know about it understand, because it's actually an important kind of question as I'm watching that controversy play out. And we'll get to politics in a little bit. How did you follow that? What was your reaction to it? What are your thoughts about it?
I feel like everyone went too far. I don't think that it was the appropriate time for Gayle to ask those questions of a friend who was grieving. And I think we don't think about how Lisa Leslie was put in a bad position. She and Kobe were good friends. And so to bring up anything negative about a friend who has died unexpectedly, I'm not sure exactly what response Gayle was expecting. And in fact, when Lisa, I think, gave a very measured response, Gayle was like, well, of course you would say that, he was your friend. It's like, well, yeah, so why ask the question if, you know what the answer is going to be, because she is not going to drag her friend through the mud when his body, isn't even in the ground yet. I also think that Snoop went too far, again, probably from a place of grief. That last sentence that he said, something like, before we come for you, or something to that effect, was way too far. The names that he called her were way too much, again, out of a place of grief. And I think we all, especially public figures and celebrities, but even just us everyday folk, need to be very thoughtful about how we respond publicly to things we're dealing with privately. Because the internet is forever.
Yeah.
And so, things then blew up. And then the next day we saw Oprah, on and Gayle even, put out an Instagram post about, that was the snippet. The video was just one portion of a much larger interview, and she didn't expect that portion to be broadcast sort of out of context by her network. And so it was a complete mess. And I think we lost the message, the overall message, which was, a very well-esteemed, well-loved person had died unexpectedly, as had his child. I always think about the folks that are left behind. There, several years ago, after, for example, Alton Sterling died and Eric Garner, all at the hands of state-sanctioned violence. And I said, I'm not going to share graphic videos of especially Black men being killed in those violent ways, because I'm thinking about their kids. I'm thinking about their family members who may log into social media for a moment of respite, and there's their father, there's their uncle laying on the ground. So I don't think we think enough about the people who we leave, who are left behind, who have to deal with these images, these videos, these conversations that are going on all the time as we process our grief for someone that, for most of us, we never met and didn't know personally.
Well, that's why I love talking to you. Not one of many reasons, because that's such a thoughtful answer, and just along the lines of the what happened with Kobe Bryant, and if you Gail King or any of the other players in this controversy, a difficult conversation. What you basically said is, everybody went a little too far. Everybody could have done better, and I think that's such a thoughtful answer. We're so often put, especially with social media, and much to mention just tribalism and all the other categories. We're supposed to be on team A or team B, on Snoop's team or Gail King's team, or Republican and Democrat, or black and white. And often the answer is far more nuanced, where, everybody was a little wrong here, or I can see why that person reacted this way, but I can also see why this person reacted that way. And how do we, don't you see that as a problem, that kind of partisan tribalism, that you have to be with one side or the other, versus your thoughtfulness and your answer with any of these issues?
Absolutely. I believe strongly in nuance.
Yeah.
And part of that may be my legal background. It's never just black and white. The old saying, he has a story and she has a story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. I believe that's the case with just about everything. Very few things in life are black and white, such stark contrast. And so I also think we need to approach people and issues with grace and humility. And we don't do that enough. Because we, either we want to be first on the story, or we want to be right, and we want to get the validation from strangers through likes and retweets, or whatever the case may be. And we are all, including me, guilty of that. There's a reason why, we post every single thing on social media, as opposed to leaving it in the group chat, or, just having an internal conversation at home.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with the ideas of grace and humility. Tell me about those. Tell me why they're...
I think they're important. I know that you know them because you are raising children. But it's hard sometimes because we get so riled up. And as much as I love social media, and I do love it, I'm probably addicted to it, especially Twitter. I'm
glad you are, because I love to see what you have to say. I really do. So, I mean, there's certain voices that...
I need to learn how to be more judicious in the amount of time that I spend on it, but I am.
I don't know about that anymore. I used to think that, and I wonder now, and I've been watching all these and listening to all these, and sorry to interrupt, but I think there's something to be said for it being an outlet and having a certain number of posts a day, 10, 20, 50, 70 posts across your social media. I don't know. I feel like certain people are, before I talked to you today, I went through all of your timeline. And I really valued it. Like, I don't know how many there was in a certain day or whatever, but I appreciated all of them. And so, I think it's part of your job in a way. And you're such an influential person and such a thought-provoking person with nuanced answers. I would have you rethink that, if you don't mind me saying so.
No, I don't mind. Thank you. Please enable my addiction.
Well, it's your job, right? In a way. It's your job. You're an authority on, to me, that's why I called you earlier. There are certain people who have a certain authority and credibility. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you're all knowing. But to me, when it comes to a number of issues, intersectionality, race, gender, politics, a lot of things. We were talking about comedy earlier, which I thought was really interesting. Like, I greatly value your opinion on things. So let me get to the next thing, which is, so keep tweeting, which is politics. You were watching, along with me and many others, the debate the other night. And I just wanted to get your take on how things are playing out now that, Bernie Sanders seems to be the front runner. You've got issues with some of his supporters, some of his ideas, and you also support a lot of what I think he stands for. But at the same time, you haven't endorsed anybody. And you got Mike Bloomberg there. What are your thoughts on the state of the race, April?
It's a mess.
It really is.
And my overall concern is that, I although I love social media, I also acknowledge that it is a bubble.
Yes.
And there are millions of people who are not on social media who are making the same sorts of very difficult decisions that we are. And so we're getting separate and different information than folks who are not on social media all the time or at all. My concern is that there are so many factions. Every candidate has their very strong supporters. And I would say, in my opinion, that Bernie's supporters are the most vocal and direct and sometimes overwhelming. My concern is that we are going to beat up all of these candidates so much that when we finally get to a nominee, whomever that may be, that they will be so bloodied and bruised by, the groups, the factions of all the other candidates that turnout is going to decrease, because at least those of us on social media who've been watching it play out for months are going to say, well, I know all of the bad things about this person and I can't get motivated to go to the polls for them.
Yeah, it's a very valid concern. And the last time that we had anything different, I think, was in the primary with Obama and Hillary, where they definitely beat each other up really good. She floated a little birtherism even at one point, and that was no good. But it wasn't too bad that he couldn't overcome it. And I think you're right about this. But I also think that I have a lot of problems with my wife, or vice versa. More importantly, she has a lot of problems with me, the way I say things, the way I react, certain principles even that I hold. And yet I adore her and respect her, and she is my partner. The point is, why can't we understand and have criticisms of the candidates that we even full-throatedly endorse and support? You can still have problems with them. Why can't we have a nuanced support or approach for political candidates the way we do with our closest friends and family members?
I don't have the answer for that. I wish I did. But and we need to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. Right. And we are definitely not there. And several of the candidates are at the point where, you're either with me or you're against me. And I don't think that's right, because, generally, all of the candidates are pro climate change and environmental justice, right? It's just a question of how you get to the end of the road. Some people are going to go straight from A to Z. Some people are going to go A to D and then back to B, and but it doesn't matter.
With healthcare,
right. With all of these issues, we all want better things for the majority of Americans. And I truly don't think that you can say that on the other side. I think for many Republicans, they just want to keep the status quo. And
survival of the fittest. But not even.
Right.
I mean, survival
of the richest, right? And the status quo isn't working for a lot of folks who are getting lost in the margins. Like I think about farmers, I think about immigrants. So I think we need to find a better way to have these conversations with each other. And I wish that the DNC and Tom Perez were leading that charge, but they truly are not. And it was only recently that some of the candidates came out and said, be more thoughtful in your interactions with folks. And I feel like in many cases, it's way too late for that. Because people are being turned off, and a turnoff means a stay at home. I was talking to someone, and the conversation ended with us saying, there is nobody that is going to, at least in this election cycle, that is going to inspire us and motivate us the way that Obama did in 2008. Right. And so the concern is that people won't show up. And so maybe we need to flip the script a little bit and say, you know what? we know that your fave is either out of the race or you're just not happy with any of them. But let's talk about the local races. Let's talk about the things that are going to affect you every single day. Your school board, who your new sheriff is going to be, who your congressperson is, right? Vote for them. And while you're there, please go ahead and vote for the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about it. I never think about the lower down on the ticket. That's a really good and important point. Very good point. I'm going to start making that one a lot more myself. I wonder, as you were talking, I'm like, well, Obama was special, very unique in so many different ways, extremely charismatic, extremely intelligent, thoughtful, a great role model for husbands and fathers like me, girl dads, if you will. But if he were running today, would it not be as divisive because of social media and because of the way that we've become, so in these silos, on these teams, and so on? I wonder. It's hard to know. But will we ever see somebody, I guess, that inspires people the way that he inspired people? Maybe Trump is that person for his supporters. I don't know.
No. I think that Trump was, for his supporters, anti-Obama. And so, so your question was, if Obama ran today, does that mean he'd be running against Trump? Because part of what we're seeing, I think, is the backlash to the 8 years that we had of Obama. That's what we're seeing on the right. Obama ran in 2007, 2008, obviously. And that was, at least for me, before Twitter. So who knows what that would look like. And it's not as if he had a smooth race. You'll remember, he had to make the speech on race, and he had to sort of disavow his sort of kind of pastor.
Yeah, but he handled that with such grace and humility. Yes, that was a huge obstacle and a major breaking point, but the way that he handled it was to his credit. It was triumphant, the way that he handled it with such nuance and thoughtfulness.
Agreed. I think also that for Black Americans specifically, we had Obama in 2008, and that was amazing for us. And he was truly, not all of us, because obviously Black people aren't a monolith, as is no other community. But we had him, and for the first time, we were able to really rally and become motivated. And we saw that with respect to the turnout numbers, right? What the majority of America is experiencing now in 2016, in 2020, is exactly what Black people have always experienced, other than the Obama years, which is sometimes you got to hold your nose and vote for the Democrat, or, you gotta, pick the lesser of two evils, but you're not feeling motivated about anybody, but you know that, in theory at least, the Democrats are going to treat you better, since Southern strategy, since, the Dixiecrats, the Democrats are going to treat you better than the Republicans, or at least you hope that way. And so now it feels like the majority of Americans are getting a taste of what Black Americans have experienced for decades.
That's for sure. Let me ask you about the controversy with Bernie Sanders and some of his supporters, his Black female supporters, and our friend Dr. Jason Johnson, and that was trending over the weekend. The what was it, Land of Misfit Black Girls, whatever. Jason,
Island of yes, from the cartoon, the Christmas cartoon. Yes,
yeah. Jason Johnson says this was it on Karen Hunter's show where we first heard this? I believe so. And he was referring to the Black women that are surrogates on the Bernie campaign. And I wonder how you thought about that. That was really, I didn't like that Jason said that. He is extremely poetic with his words and always has been. And I'm not going to say that it was inartful. He knew what he was saying, but it has created quite a controversy. And I wonder if you have thoughts that are you as thoughtful on this issue as everything else? This is a hard one.
It is hard. I think he went too far. I think he was inartful. I think that regardless of how you feel about their politics, we still have to provide respect and grace to Black women who are leading the charge with respect to these issues for their candidate, even if you disagree with their policies. I don't know what the history is between Jason and any of the Black female Sanders supporters. So I can't speak on that. It was unfortunate. It really was. I understood the overall point he was trying to make, but I think it could have been done in a more artful way.
There's within, intersectionality, which you've spoken so much about, there can be, misogyny within the Black community, Black men talking about Black women. That's a really hard issue. It's certainly not one that I want to really comment on, more one that I have a question about. And it's a conversation, I think, more for the Black community to be having. But I mean, how much of that do you see? Is that at play here? Not necessarily always specifically with this situation, but how much of an issue is that within the Black community when it pertains to these candidates especially?
I think it's always an issue, and this harkens back to us talking about Snoop and Gayle King. Right. It's the same issue. It's, even if you vehemently disagree, you still should show a modicum of respect and decency to people who look like your mother and your grandmother and your aunt well and your sister.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what it is. And of course, that is a two-way street. But over time, we've definitely seen, because of white supremacy and misogyny and patriarchy and misogynoir, which is specifically about Black women, we have seen Black women burdened with insults and threats and required to do the heavy lifting to keep us moving forward. And I think that's unfortunate. And Jason's was a misstep. Misogynoir.
Never heard that.
Yes. That's almost the same, but Noir at the end.
Yeah, I'm looking it up right now. Misogynoir, Wikipedia, is misogyny directed towards Black women where race and gender both play roles in bias. I don't know how you feel about me reading Wikipedia. All right, well, along the lines of not knowing things, earlier when you and I were talking off the air, off the record, you mentioned Duane Wade as a child, has a trans girl, right? A boy
yes.
that identifies as a girl. Am I saying that wrong? Either way,
yes.
Okay, fine. So correct me, but I didn't know about this story, and you told me about it, and so I had no idea, and I'm trying to look into it and read more about it. But it's really fascinating that a huge superstar basketball player is dealing with that with one of his own children and publicly, and you said he's dealing with it with a lot of grace and understanding.
Absolutely. Both he and his partner, Gabrielle Union, have been exemplary in the language that they are using and the unconditional love and support that they are giving their daughter. I am still learning the language that the trans community uses and prefers. So at this point, I want to say their child was identified as a male at birth, and now she is transitioning into a young lady. She's 12 years old. And there's so many things, Duane has talked about this on the Ellen show. He said that, this isn't a decision that she came to lightly, nor was it a decision that she made overnight or even the last year. He said that she has known since she was 3 years old that she was moving along this path, and so they have taken the journey with them. Gabrielle Union said that she reached out to several of the members of the TV show Pose, who are trans people, to find the correct language and resources and support necessary so that they could love and support their daughter as she is coming forward. I applaud them for all of this, including doing it so publicly, so that other trans kids can see what love and support look like if perhaps they're not getting it at home. And even more so, the adults in their lives can model the same type of behavior, because obviously they could have kept this under wraps and gone on this journey privately. But they have chosen to both teach and educate and learn in a very public way. And so it's just been beautiful to watch.
I want to ask you, I know I'm jumping all over here, but getting back to politics in the presidential race, your thoughts on Elizabeth Warren?
I'm a fan. I will say that from the beginning, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and Julian Castro were my top three in no particular order. And then we've lost two of them who have suspended their campaigns. And so Elizabeth Warren is the closest to where I want to be. I look, in life generally, but especially in politics, I think it's really important to look at who your person surrounds themselves with.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
And so I look at the team that Elizabeth Warren has created over time. She's gotten some folks from the Julian Castro campaign. She's gotten some folks from Kamala Harris's campaign, but she started with a very strong contingent of Black women. There was even on Twitter, 100 Black Women for Warren group created, several months back now. And so for me, she's the future. She is our best bet in leading this country forward. And I don't buy into any of that electability crap. I think she absolutely can win the nomination. I absolutely think that she can beat Trump. And I was really, really happy to see her be so strong and aggressive and forceful. I find those words emboldening for women and not at all disqualifying, with respect to this most recent debate. And that is the kind of energy that I want to see, because it was perhaps the first time that I said, oh, okay, she can, in fact, stand up against Trump, and not just on policy, but also with respect to rhetoric and all of the crap that we know that he's going to throw at her.
But as I said on Twitter, and you retweeted, which is always awesome for me when I get an April Rain retweet, basically, and now I can't find the tweet, but yes, while you and I were standing and cheering for Elizabeth Warren picking the meat of Michael Bloomberg's bones in public on a national stage, there were a lot of people, mostly men, but I'm sure women as well, that were uncomfortable with a woman dressing down a powerful man like that.
Yeah, I don't care.
The answer is who cares, right? So be it.
At this point, I think that we need to start bringing the bazooka to the gunfight.
Right.
I don't think we can bring the knife anymore. Democrats have been known for civility, and that's lovely. But even Michelle Obama said, sometimes when they go low, we go high, but sometimes that shit doesn't work. Excuse me. Those are her words. Yeah. I think that's absolutely true. 2016 was ugly, right? And we know that Trump is nothing but emboldened for 2020. And so it's going to be worse. And we need to be prepared for that. And I think, taking the high road and, being calm and civil and while he is, down in the gutter is not going to work for us this time. I think that this is the time that we need to show strength and resilience because, the future of the country depends on it. If you look at what has happened over the past 3 years as he has attempted to undo all of the policies of Obama, from climate change to immigration and everything else.
Not only that, the obvious, but all of the norms and before Obama, like the norms of even the Bush administration and presidents before them in terms of behavior and, he's tried to undo everything. Sorry to interrupt you, but it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, when's the last time we've had a press conference? So we know what's going on, in the White House. The fact that there are still so many vacancies within the administration and throughout the executive branch.
But just horrible, cruel, immature material. He retweeted a tape of a guy peeing on an open mic, and he's the president of the United States, and he acts like a horrible child all the time. Getting back to Elizabeth Warren, though, April, do you know Clint Smith, the writer?
Of course.
Love Clint. And he tweeted, the way Elizabeth Warren speaks about almost every issue, whether it be the environment, healthcare, income inequality, and lifts up the experience of Black people is so important. She doesn't wait for the race question because she recognizes the way racism is entangled in everything. Isn't that kind of the definition of open-mindedness, the opposite of ignorance, or what we now call wokeness, that she can recognize the racial component of so many issues before it's asked about, before it's addressed. Do you agree with him?
Yes. Absolutely. I agree with Clint on anything he says.
Yeah, same.
He is prolific.
He really is.
But yes, especially on this. And I want to tip my hat a bit to Julian Castro, because I think that he was first on a lot of these issues. The first time to mention people who were killed by Black people specifically, who were killed by state-sanctioned violence on a debate stage, the first person to mention trans women on a debate stage. And so I think that Warren having Castro now fully in her camp has been helpful to her. And she listens. We started talking about, what should people do? I truly believe that she listens to, the Black folks and other marginalized folks on her team and in the community, and is still continuing to learn. And that openness and ability, and again, grace and humility, right? I think her humility in saying, I don't know it all, but I do want to help. Tell me what the best thing is to do, is enlightening, and something that I look for in a candidate.
Or a person. Yeah, for sure. What about though the idea that Elizabeth Warren identified once as Native American? Do you see that as a controversy? Or for a while, and I don't know the whole story of that. If she got anything out of that, or if she in fact did write that down in an application. My take has always been, my dad told me that our family, my grandmother's family, owned a castle in Sicily, and my answer to that is really, why did they leave then? Who knows what
it was too drafty.
How does it echo?
No central heat.
That's why they left their castle.
That's it.
But I mean, your family, you have family lore, and that's what it is. Now we have 23andMe, so it's different. Do you think that was? What do you think about that whole thing?
It's disqualifying for some people. It isn't for me. There's a long running thing within the Black community that all of us have Indian in our blood somewhere. Like I heard that from my grandmother. There's a reason why
every Black person I know says they're Cherokee.
Yeah, and specifically Cherokee, right? We don't even pick any other.
There's Blackfoots available, and you don't even.
Nope. And that but so it doesn't matter.
Right.
So it's disqualifying for some, and I understand that. What I will also say is that I think that all of the candidates have flaws. I am more interested in what the candidates have done since those flaws have been revealed, or since they have matured even further. Now, she was a grown woman, Bernie was a grown man, they've all messed up, we can talk, all of them, I don't like the way. Right. I don't like the way that Joe Biden treated Anita Hill in the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. Right. And again, that was 30 years ago, or, 25, something around there. But what have they done since then? Right. I can't point to any legislation that Bernie has created that has made the life of marginalized communities better. And he's been a legislator and, in Vermont and in Washington, D.C. for 30 years. I specifically can point to, the CFPB and other things that Elizabeth Warren has done since becoming a legislator, since she's been in office, that have helped marginalized people. And so that's where I make my decision. None of them are perfect. They all have baggage. We all have baggage. There's a reason why we all don't run for office, because some of us don't want skeletons coming out, or whatever the case may be. But for those people who choose to run, I think it has to be based on their record. Now, whether you want to go back 20 years or 50 years, that's your call to make. But at least for me, it's, since you've been in office, what have you done? I look at Pete Buttigieg, since he was mayor, there were significant problems with the Black community in his small town. Amy Klobuchar, while she was prosecutor, there were issues with the Black community. Those are the things that I look at. But also we were talking about this earlier, and I want to get, you on the record on this as well. Like, so often we have opportunities in our lives to change the way that we think and the way
that we live our lives. And I mentioned earlier to you, you know, when it comes to someone who's found guilty of rape or murder, and they go to prison and they serve their time, and during that time they literally become a different person. Not literally, well, yeah, I mean mentally.
Sometimes,
and they find redemption, and they become a voice for any kind of justice or equity, and that's the type of person that I find most admirable and who I respect. And so, you know, if, for example, if you are, you know, a Klan member and an out and out racist, and through any number of experiences from, you know, we could talk about Robert Byrd, we could talk about this guy, Christian Piccolini, who is a white supremacist and now, you know, is advocating to help those come out of that. Like, we need to be able to value and respect people's evolutions and not focus only on the worst thing that they did, because people evolve. Your thoughts on that idea?
Malcolm X, you know, beginning and end. You know, he was a criminal. He would have told you that he was a criminal. Went to jail for several years. Found the Nation of Islam, found the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and completely turned his life around and became one of the most prolific leaders that Black people in this country have ever had. You know, and so if he can change, we all can change. And I am here to meet people where they are now. And actions always speak louder than words for me. Right. And so it's important for me to trust but verify, as we say. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm going to, you know, see where you go with it. And, you know, if I give you a little bit of leeway, where are you going to take it, and how are you going to make the lives of traditionally underrepresented communities better? You said if he could change, we all could change. I thought you were breaking into the Rocky IV speech for a second there right now. I mean, I could. Everybody could I don't want any Russian references today, sir. Fair enough. You mentioned state-sanctioned violence earlier twice. What is that? What are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that police officers work for the government is a state, and those police officers are killing people. Yeah. Unarmed people very often, you know, and then so there are a myriad of names that we could call, you know, Tamir Rice and Sandra Bland and Malcolm X, you know, and unfortunately that list is long and apparently never ending. But it's the idea that people who very often were literally hired to protect and serve are doing the exact opposite of that. And are killing first and asking questions later, sometimes after they plant a weapon or after they, you know, plant drugs or whatever the case may be. You know, stop and frisk was state-sanctioned violence instituted by Bloomberg, and he actually fought to keep it going, you know, and up until just a few years ago, 2015, he was still, you know, a supporter of the program, even after it was judged by the courts to be wrong. How concerned are you, by the way, that Michael Bloomberg is basically seemingly buying off endorsements of prominent Black politicians and others? You know, it's a tough thing because he gives them money for their campaigns. We have this horrible system where you need money for a campaign, and then they come out and endorse him. That's a really troubling development in my mind. But it's such a stupid and broken system. It's like you got to take money from almost anybody. I mean, you don't have to, let's be clear, but you know, you've got to raise the money for your campaign. What do you make of the fact that Michael Bloomberg is spending so much money and seemingly buying the endorsements of people who otherwise wouldn't support him? Yeah, I hate it. Especially as I look at some of the prominent people like Bobby Rush, like Jeffrey Canada, like there are several young Black mayors across the country who are buying into it, you know, and so I think there are a couple of different, you know, part of it for some people may just be plain greed. If he's offering me money, I'm taking money. You know, the rent is still due on the 1st, right? Part of it may be, you know, I don't believe in Bloomberg. I don't believe he's the nominee, but he owes me for stop and frisk. He owes me for the now exonerated 5. And so I'm going to take as much money from him as possible in some sort of weird take on reparations. You know, I don't know. I can't get into the head of folks who some of whom, are civil rights activists, who are, interested in furthering the progress of marginalized people, seemingly giving a pass to really horrible policies that were enacted by Bloomberg, stop and frisk just being the most well-known of them. So, it bothers me. It bothers me that he's seemingly able to just buy his way onto the debate stage. It bothers me that Tom Perez changed the rules midway through the debate process, which may have helped some other candidates who got out of the race specifically because of money, talking about, Kamala Harris and Julian Castro and others. But now those rules are changed. So we saw Bloomberg on the stage at the most recent debate. All of that bothers me because that's not, money shouldn't be able to buy democracy.
Couldn't agree with you more. Let me wrap it up by talking with you about comedy. You're a big fan of comedy. You're going to see Felonious Monk, even though this is not a live show. It's a podcast, so we should promote his future dates. Follow him on Twitter. Really, really funny guy. But I was asking you earlier about just this idea of comedy and political correctness and punching down. And you were talking about Dave Chappelle and the trans jokes and we can talk about an endless white comedians. I focus on him because that was a very controversial one, and we talked about it. But what do you make of what's happening in comedy today in terms of not the political correctness or whatever people want to call it? I look at it and get frustrated with comedians still punching down, even if they are themselves members of marginalized communities.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. It almost seems lazy to me. If you have to make your money, make your bones by further already marginalized people, maybe that's not the profession for you. There is so much going on in this world that we can make light of, that, laugh to keep from crying. Black people have done that since we were brought to these shores. So there's a way to do that without specifically singling out people who are already vulnerable and shining a light on them and saying, look how whatever they are. I just feel like it's lazy. And I think about Roy Wood Jr. Is a great comedian. He's on The Daily Show. He's got his own stand-up special. He's doing TV, and he doesn't punch down. And yet he actually makes me laugh at his,
I was
at his
worried
shows.
you were going to be critical of him. He's a friend of mine, and I think he's one of the funniest comics, period, of my generation. Great. Yeah, he's a great example. All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the fact that I was able that you let me call you earlier and that that you make me feel safe in my ignorance and apathy about all of these questions. And, I realized I was thinking about this. Probably most of the people that listen to this podcast and listen to most of what I do are probably white men. I have a pretty good mix that I'm proud of. But I think it's really important that that white men, especially the way we self-segregate and that we continue to have these conversations and listen to these conversations and break down the old networks that we have been privileged to be members of and open them up. And I feel like having a conversation with you anytime really enlightens people that are curious and want to do that. So I am forever in your debt for these conversations and our friendship that allows me to feel safe and comfortable in talking with you.
Well, I truly appreciate that. And it means a lot that you are bringing my voice to your listeners so that hopefully they will become more curious and, follow people that may not look like them, that may not have the same views as them on social media and, learn more, because I think that's how we create a better society. We slowly sort of dip our toes in, we sit, we listen, we read, we learn, we ask questions at appropriate times, and that's how we come together.
Thank you, April. Really great, as always, and you can talk to me on tape or off tape anytime. I always learn so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. April Rain. I hope you liked our conversation, and I look forward to continuing that conversation with her. Who else should I invite on? Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Tweet me, Instagram me. Now time for A few tidbits from the week. I see this tweet blowing up, and clearly this professor of religious history at William and Lee University named Mickey Brock must have touched a nerve, something that a lot of people were feeling, including myself, even though I'm not a woman. I think she sounds like she's speaking for women. Her name is Mickey Brock, and she tweeted on Sunday, I think, morning, that Elizabeth Warren isn't doing better in the Democratic primary feels personal to me and to so many women in my life. We know what it is to be hyper-prepared, to have the plans, to do the necessary work, and then some to smile and try to be likable, to bring the energy, enthusiasm, to skate that absurdly thin line between passion and not too emotional, angry and acceptable, relatable and professional, to do things as right as can be done and yet still be passed over and looked over in favor of men. And this bar is even higher for women of color. Listen, I like Bernie. Some of his supporters, not so much. But would he be where he is, messy hair, yelling, unwillingness to discuss personal life, etc., if he was a woman? I doubt it. Anyway, it's not over, but I just wanted to say that some of us are tired and a bit sad. That's at Mickey Brock that wrote. That was a 3-tweet thread that's been getting retweeted all day, and I wanted to share that with you. I thought that was something that a lot of people were feeling, including myself. I absolutely agree with it. I loved watching Elizabeth Warren pick the meat from Michael Bloomberg's bones and then hit him with his own fists at the debate the other night. I thoroughly enjoyed that, but it's disappointing that Elizabeth Warren hasn't done better, and you have to wonder if it has anything to do with that. She's a woman, of course, and Bernie Sanders deserves a lot of credit. I like Bernie Sanders. I've interviewed Bernie Sanders a number of times. It's always been cool to me. I know some people who work in his office who have always been cool. Ari Ravenhoft is a great, great guy. But I've always just worried that he's very old. I've just worried that he was too old to begin with. I at one point said on cable TV that he didn't really get young people charged up. I was 100% wrong about that, by the way. And speaking of other great tweets, Michael Jollett, who is awesome on Twitter at Michael_Jollett, Jollett, replying to basically the support for Bernie Sanders, wrote, Baby boomers had a living wage. Baby boomers had mostly free college. Baby boomers enjoyed an infrastructure built with a 90% tax rate on the rich. 90%. Bernie is crushing the youth vote simply because he wants to give them the same thing baby boomers had. I think he puts that really, really well. I've had this discussion, an argument with my dad, and I think that inequality, wealth inequality, is the economic issue of our time. I tweeted that earlier today myself, and someone said, no, climate change is the economic issue of our time. And I think that person is probably right. But I tweeted, wealth inequality is the economic issue of our time. The concentration at the top is embarrassing and an injustice. The anti-labor, working class attitude, all that. People just want healthcare, education, and housing to be affordable and accessible, like our white parents had. I mean, to be sure, you know, there's always been this horrific racial inequality and gender inequality. But the fact that there's a lot of white men that aren't doing better than their parents, and I would include myself in that boat to some extent because of the high cost of healthcare. And, you know, I've made a lot different choices than my dad made. My dad has made really smart, responsible financial choices. My mom went back to college when she was 40 and got her bachelor's and then her master's degree and got a job as a teacher and worked really hard and got the healthcare that went with it. So they worked very hard, my parents, and they made some responsible choices. My wife and I have made maybe less responsible choices in terms of the careers we've chosen. But nonetheless, my wife certainly has been very responsible. We've got great credit. We bought this house, but we're underwater on our mortgage because even though we bought a house in a community that historically had always gained value, the suburbs of New York City, one of the most expensive places in the world to live. But of course, the 1 year that we bought the house, it was overvalued. The housing bubble burst. We didn't know that. And we get screwed. We get completely screwed by that. My wife has been fiscally conservative and so responsible. We've never had credit card debt. We've done things right, but you get pinched. You're getting pinched by the system, a system designed to screw us over, basically to make profits for the extremely wealthy. It's complete bullshit. The cost of everything is so much more exorbitant, especially healthcare and education. And so this generation wants more accessible, more affordable healthcare and education and housing. And they want to be able to get a share of the profits. There's so much wealth concentrated toward the top of so many companies, and capitalism certainly isn't patriotic. And there's just a lot for young people to be upset about. And I was wrong when I said that they weren't supporting Bernie Sanders. There's a lot of support for Bernie Sanders with young folks across the ethnic spectrum as well. A lot of immigrants supporting him in the Nevada caucuses you saw over the weekend, undocumented folks, people who support the Dreamers. Undocumented people can't vote, but all of these people support the pathway to citizenship that Bernie Sanders has always supported. Nate Silver wrote about the win in Nevada. Nate Silver of 538. This was a big, impressive win for Bernie Sanders, and it should be even clearer now that Sanders is easily the most likely Democrat to win the nomination. What do you think of that? Agree? Disagree? Bill B. in D.C. wrote no, but there's no single alternative to Bernie. He lays claim to 3 wins, and this last one is pretty decisive. Probably divisive as well. If he wins South Carolina, Super Tuesday is pretty much a formality. That's what Bill B. in D.C. tweeted me. Chad at NJ Politico tweets, "This scares me." Okay, so what are you scared of if Bernie Sanders got the nomination? Are you scared that he would lose? He's a sure loser to Donald Trump. Are you scared that he would win and you don't like his policies? Are you scared that he's old and he's going to die on the way there? I have some fear about that. He had a heart attack, and how can he possibly do that job at that age? I want a younger person, but I mean, obviously, if he wins, I like Bernie Sanders. He's always been uncorruptible. I think that's very important. He wants to put people over profit. You can call that whatever you want. I call it human dignity. But seriously, that's my question. What are you scared of? That he would lose? His policies? What is it? What are you scared of about Bernie Sanders being the nominee, much less the president? I'd love to know. A lot of people we're very divided over Bernie Sanders. A lot of concern about Bernie Sanders and whether or not he can win. Of course, there was the controversy this week that the Russians were intervening in the election to help both President Trump and Bernie Sanders win. And then Bernie Sanders knew that intelligence and he didn't say anything. But of course, he was vindicated when basically he's like, I didn't say anything because it was classified information. I'd be breaking the law if I said anything. At least that's a defense of him that I read. Does anybody still have an issue with that? I'm not sure. So that is a few things. Those are a few things that are happening. And of course, the president of the United States, when learning that his national security director or director of national intelligence had briefed Congress that the Russians were again intervening in our election, interfering in our election and trying to do it for President Trump. The president found out that his director of national intelligence briefed Congress on that and went nuts, apparently, and lost his mind. And 5 days later, fired the guy and replaced him with a guy people are calling a loyalist, the former U.S. ambassador to Germany, whose name is Grinnell. So look him up and look up McGuire, who is the name of his DNI that I fired. And you know what? Let me just let my friend Ali Velshi take it away on his show, Velshi, on MSNBC this weekend. He gave a little monologue about it, lays it all out for you, and ends on, well, a very ominous warning or feeling, even for him. Here it is from MSNBC, Ali Velshi.
But no, I'm talking about DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. I won't quiz you on the names of the past 3 DNIs because, well, that would just be unfair, but I'll give you a clue. A new one is on his way in, and an acting one, of course, because that's how Donald Trump rolls. But the Director of National Intelligence is a really important job. In fact, the Director of National Intelligence is likely the most important person whose name you don't readily know. That's, of course, I'm assuming that you think national security and your safety is a big deal, which it is. Established in 2005, after the interagency scuffles that failed to prevent the 9/11 attacks, the Director of National Intelligence was created to oversee the nation's 17 intelligence agencies so that a unified, coordinated evaluation could be made of threats to Americans and the world. And the reason for it is really tangible, because prior to 9/11, the CIA had intel that, had it shared with the FBI, might have prevented the attacks. It's the DNI's job to parse that info, to deal with the heads of all the agencies and get the best and most important intel directly to the president, regardless of whether or not the president finds that information palatable. The process was designed to keep us safe, not to assuage egos. We already know this administration has ignored serious threats to national security, like the rising threat of white nationalism, anti-Semitism, or other forms of extremism, and of course, Russia. What the president needs is someone who will tell him the truth, not someone who will tell him what he wants to hear. In fact, any president needs that from the DNI. This president, however, fired his most recent DNI after he, Joseph Maguire, dared to allow intelligence officers to brief Congress about Russian threats to the election. That's a topic we know Trump hates. Now Trump is planning on appointing the current ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, as the new acting director of national intelligence. Now, Grenell is not the man for this job. Putting aside that he has mainly distinguished himself as a bombastic Trump loyalist, wading into domestic German politics, praising far-right politicians, and succumbing to partisanship, he fundamentally doesn't have any experience in either intel or running an organization. But there's more. According to the rules, Grenell can only serve until March 11th, until the president nominates someone to be the permanent director. But some think Trump may once again nominate someone who won't pass Senate muster, attempting to prolong Grenell's run as acting DNI. In other words, Trump may use loopholes to keep his unqualified appointee in one of the country's most important jobs. That should worry you, possibly more than Trump's use of the Justice Department for his own personal benefit. As retired U.S. Navy Admiral William McRaven, the Navy SEAL who oversaw the raid that took Osama bin Laden out, recently wrote in support of the outgoing DNI, Joseph Maguire, quote, "When good men and women can't speak the truth, when facts are inconvenient, when integrity and character no longer matter, when presidential ego and self-preservation are more important than national security, then there is nothing left to stop the triumph of evil." End quote. Are you worried? I am.
Yes, of course we're worried, especially when you say it like that, Velshi. Oh my gosh. But I think that's a huge story that President Trump replaced his director of national intelligence for briefing Congress that a foreign country was trying to intervene in our election, and replace him with a loyalist. Really disconcerting times. Obviously, you've got what's going on at the Department of Justice with Bill Barr and thousands of former federal prosecutors writing, demanding for his resignation, thousands of judges as well demanding his resignation in a letter. And so that is huge news as well. What is going on at the Department of Justice? CNN had former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig, who's a CNN analyst, on with some Trump-supporting guy, and Anderson Cooper, talking about that letter and the significance of the demand that it's not a partisan letter.
Yeah, Anderson, first of all, this is not 2,000 Democrats who signed this letter. This is 2,000 former prosecutors who are aligned with both parties, who served under both parties. I served more time under Republican than Democrat. But this is no rush to judgment. Bill Barr
Are you a Republican or a Democrat?
Bill Barr has been in office for a full year. And let's look at the track record here. First of all, he misstated, he distorted Robert Mueller's findings. He tried to keep the whistleblowers' complaint on Ukraine from going to Congress, even though the law is very clear that it had to go to Congress. He declined to even open an investigation of the Ukraine matter, when I think any prosecutor worth his salt would at least open an investigation and take a look. And out of the 60,000 plus cases that the Justice Department does every year, what two cases has William Barr and the higher echelons of the Justice Department come into and overruled the trial prosecutors, the line prosecutors? Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. What do those two people have in common? They're both close political allies of Donald Trump. You can't ignore this pattern. It's not all about Roger Stone. Roger Stone was the straw that broke the back, but it's been a full year of abuse from William Barr.
What is going on? Who is left in the administration to challenge the president, to be, as some call, a patriot? These are scary times. There's no doubt about it. And I'm with you. I'm also worried about this coronavirus. I've got that on my mind and my own personal stuff, of course. So I want to work through all of this with you and continue to talk about these ideas and news stories and the election and culture with you. I want to create now a potential place for us to share with each other coping mechanisms. I think this is a time where people need to reach out and fight the fear and the loneliness that comes with much of this. And I'm trying to create a community here now. I don't know how I'm doing it, but definitely those of you that are paid subscribers on Patreon, patreon.com, that is going to be a community of people that I'm going to try to connect with each other a little bit more and to depend on and hear from each other as we support each other. That's part of what the Patreon community can benefit from. I've got some ideas there. If you have ideas of how to do that, I am wide open to them. So that is all for episode 50. What is this, 52? Doug D out in, where are you? Wyoming. Doug and his family have been listeners for a long time. Told me I skipped episode 49. Yeah, apparently I skipped episode 49. I don't even know what happened, but maybe I can't explain it. I'm not good with numbers, apparently. I'll go back and take a look at that. But Doug, thank you. I'm so glad to have you still listening. Thanks for pointing that out. So whatever episode it is, remember, we don't always see things as they are. We see things as we are. So ask the people around you how you can support them, what your support looks like. Ask your spouse that question today. What does my support for you look like? Sometimes our intentions are not felt the way that they are met, right? Is that you? Maybe that's you. Things are going amazing with my wife and I, and the girls are doing really well. I'm trying so hard to build this independent media brand of Stand Up and Pete Dominic and whatever it is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support, and share this podcast with your friends. Tell them about it. Subscribe. Give it 5 stars. And if you haven't written a rating, those go a long way as well. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.